Tonight on Treadstone International, we will be reporting to you the state of our food supply. A controversial topic, recent technology has enabled us to directly take control of nature. Whether or not genetically engineered plants are safe for human consumption is under intense debate. This will be our subject tonight on Treadstone 25 Minutes.
Researchers say the minister's move will cripple research in the country and deny food to hundreds of thousands who need relief assistance. The minister imposed the moratorium in the wake of a study suggesting that GMOs cause cancer.
We're working with farmers and partners worldwide to realize a vision for sustainable agriculture.
A vision not sustained by all.
It's about every farmer, every person, and every seed in the world.
Now to your hostesses, live from Canada, Nicolette and Molly.
Good evening, I'm Nicolette Montreal.
And I'm Molly in Toronto.
And you're watching Treadstone Studios live from Mooseland, Canada.
There's a lot for us to cover tonight, so let's get started.
Emily Quebec is in the field today to start our newest broadcast in Treadstone 25 Minutes.
And to you, Emily.
Tonight on Treadstone Canada, we'll be doing an investigation involving GMOs, also known as genetically modified organisms. I'll be interviewing several people on their opinions on these genetically modified organisms. So here's a concerned citizen. Concerned citizen, what are your opinions about genetically modified organisms?
GMOs are bad for people. I mean, they're hurting the animals, they're hurting us. I mean, they're genetically modified, which could potentially harm everyone.
How do you feel about genetically modified organics in your food?
Well, I really should know more about that, but I'm not very educated. What I do know doesn't really seem harmful to me.
So you feel okay eating them?
Yeah, seems fine to me. If it's food, I'll eat it.
I'm here with these lovely people who have agreed to be interviewed. And I was wondering if you knew anything about genetically modified organics.
A little bit.
A little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they're good or bad for our bodies?
I would prefer not to have them that way. Yeah. I realize I do get some a lot of the time. I don't go straight to organic.
Okay.
I just kind of walk a fine line with it. I would prefer they were. I'm offering things strictly God-made.
Would you like to see the United States start labeling whether or not a product is genetically engineered?
Perhaps. Mm-hmm.
That way you know what you're eating?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perhaps. Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I think unless a person, unless it's labeled,
yeah.
And hopefully if it ever got to that point, the, sources would be honest.
Over 80% of the crops of sugar beets, soy, cotton, corn, and canola grown in the United States are genetically modified. Thanks, Nicolette. I guess 50 countries worldwide have started labeling GMOs. They have strict regulations. Those countries happen to be France, Germany, Canada, yet the United States is excluded from it. Oh, hi, Mom! How are you? Let's interview my mom! We're discussing genetically modified organisms.
No good.
No good? How would you feel about your kid eating?
I would not like it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe you would want to eat those?
No.
What?
Genetically modified food. Of course. I agree with that. Exactly. If you don't know what it is, it's probably not good for you.
Do you know some of the processes that they go through to genetically engineer these foods?
I would think they're done in a lab.
Yes.
Which doesn't sound good.
So you're all for nature.
So I need to go buy some non-genetically modified foods right now, like tortillas and
not buckle.
lettuce. I'm gonna get some non-genetically modified lettuce.
How do you feel about Monsanto?
They're evil.
Monsanto. That's a weird name. I can't believe you're here. Okay. Okay, thanks, Mom.
I like that hat. Hey, that's Emily.
We'll see you. We'll probably see you in there. As I was saying, the United States is one of the only industrial countries left that hasn't required the labeling of genetically modified organisms. But grassroots organizations have made huge strides in increasing awareness about genetically modified organisms. As we saw with Prop 32 in California, it established how corporations like Monsanto will fight against the labeling process. So what do they have to hide?
Thanks for the interesting viewpoints, Emily.
Well, I'm still a bit confused as to where all these GMOs came from. Nicolette has gone out to do some background research for us. Let's see what she's found. Nicolette?
Genetically engineered organisms were first developed in the 1980s. Genetic engineering generally refers to the use of recombinant DNA techniques to splice together pieces of DNA and give an organism new traits and characteristics. This past week, I interviewed Miss Leslie Prey, an independent science writer from Los Angeles, California, and spoke with her about the process. Miss Prey, you have a PhD in population genetics and have written countless articles on the subject. So for our viewers, how do they actually engineer an organism's genes?
Well, the process begins with the insertion of foreign DNA into a new host cell. We first cut DNA with specific restriction enzymes. These leave open segments or sticky ends in the DNA. By using plasmids or DNA shuttles, we are able to incorporate foreign DNA into the host cell. Finally, we use DNA ligase to seal the strands, thus creating a recombinant organism.
The tools of biotechnology start with the construction of a recombinant DNA molecule, the insertion of DNA from one species into a plasmid vector. The first step is to identify a gene of interest, in this case, a pest-resistant gene from the Bt bacterium. In creating recombinant DNA for plants, the most commonly used vector is a plasmid isolated from Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Next, restriction enzymes, which recognize specific DNA sequences, cut both the plasmid and the DNA of interest between corresponding base pairs.
So the restriction enzymes are a way of getting down to smaller pieces, more manageable pieces of DNA and even single genes.
Any two fragments of DNA cut by the same restriction enzyme can then be recombined because they have complementary sequences on their dangling or sticky ends that pair back up.
The other part that you need is a series of promoters and controllers so that, when the gene is in the genome of the corn plant, it's turned on. The third part that they needed was, again, just another type of a marker, and we used as a second marker a herbicide-resistant gene.
During transformation, the recombinant plasmid with the gene of interest can be reintroduced into Agrobacterium and cloned as the bacterium multiplies naturally. The bacteria can be used as vectors to infect plant cells growing in culture.
One thing that surprises us is that U.S. regulators rely almost exclusively on information provided by the biotech crop producer, and those data are not published in journals or subjected to peer review. The picture that emerges from our study of U.S. regulation of GM foods is a rubber stamp approval process designed to increase public confidence in, but not ensure the safety of, genetically engineered foods.
studies with GM foods indicate that they may cause hepatic, pancreatic, renal, and reproductive effects and may alter hematological, biochemical, and immunologic parameters, the significance of which remains to be solved with chronic toxicity studies.
Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory in the presence of Roundup herbicide. Now, Roundup normally kills bacteria. This bacteria was surviving. They said, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium that allowed it to survive the Roundup and put it into soybeans. And now those Roundup-ready soybeans can be sprayed with Roundup herbicide and they don't die, just all the other plant biodiversity in the ground dies. The active ingredient in Roundup is called glyphosate. Glyphosate was patented in 1964, not as an herbicide, but as a broad-spectrum chelator. It hugs a lot of different minerals that are needed and does not allow the plants to access them. It also destroys some beneficial microorganisms in the soil, which normally provide nutrients to the plant. It also promotes pathogenic organisms in the soil, which then overrun the plant. And so it creates weaker plants, stronger disease, and the disease does the killing. Now, what do the livestock in the United States eat? They eat largely Roundup-ready crops. Roundup-ready soy, corn, cottonseed, canola mash, sugar beet pulp, and soon alfalfa. So a huge percentage of their food intake is Roundup-ready crops. Now remember, Roundup pulls the nutrients out of the crop. It makes them unavailable. So now we have millions of livestock eating nutrient-deficient food. And what do we eat? We eat plants and we eat animals and take their milk. So it turns out it's a perfect storm now, not just for plant disease, but for animal and human disease. When 44,000 secret FDA memos were made public from a lawsuit about the subject of genetic engineering, the director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine made it absolutely clear that GMOs in animal feed had a unique danger. Toxins can bioaccumulate in animals and in their milk. And so if there were toxins in genetically modified feed, then we might have higher levels of those toxins in the animals that eat the feed or in their milk or other products from those animals.
Aren't the only concern scientists and consumers have with genetically modified organisms. Going back to the recombinant DNA process, whatever actually happens to the new alien DNA? Well, according to actionbioscience.org, it doesn't always completely break down in the digestive tract. Internal bacteria can then take up these genes, which then opens up the possibility of the body reincorporating them into its own DNA. Thus, the insertion of these genes can result in dangerous unintended effects.
We go now to a private interview with author and food activist Michael Pollan. And Mr. Pollan, what is your stance on GMOs?
Well, uncertainty is the theme that unifies most of the questions now being raised about agricultural biotech by environmentalists and scientists. By planting millions of acres of genetically altered plants, we are introducing something novel into the environment and the food chain, consequences of which are not completely understood. For one thing, the pollen from genetically engineered corn also contains the Bt toxin. In laboratory experiments, scientists have found that this pollen is lethal to monarch butterflies. The caterpillars, when they eat the leaves dusted with pollen, they die. Will this happen in the field? And how serious will the problem be if it does? We just don't know.
Mr. George Naylor, would you please tell us why you feel so strongly about GMOs?
Well, all these other farmers, they're messing with 3 million years of evolution. Sure, you might get a yield bump, but whatever you make on the extra corn goes right back to cover the premium for the seed. I fail to see why I should be laundering money for Monsanto.
Companies do engage in trials and tests though, yet they are hardly honest. More often than not, the conductors of these experiments will water down the amount of GM food products in the feed to reduce levels of GMO foods that the animals actually eat. It has also been reported that these trials have too small of a statistical evidence to be significant. They often ignore when an animal gets sick or even dies. There has also been rumors that these scientists will tamper with the duration of the trials.
Thank you, Emily. One of the many concerns people have over GMOs is their relation to an increase in food allergies. After genetically modified soy was introduced to Britain, soy allergies went up almost 50%, and many people exhibited skin reactions, such as rashes or hives, to the genetically modified soy. The World Health Organization has also chimed in on this topic, formally stating that allergies are their top concern for the health problems related to genetically modified food.
Despite the concerns over allergies and their relation to GMOs, there have never been tests or trials done with humans to determine what the long-term effects may be. The studies done on small animals like rats and mice, however, have revealed startling information. Mice who were fed BT corn ended up with damaged intestines and exhibited many allergy-like symptoms, while the rats who were fed genetically modified soy while pregnant saw half of their offspring die within 3 weeks.
The first study to determine if genetically modified produce was safe for the market was conducted on the Flavor Saver tomato. The study, which wasn't peer-reviewed before release, showed several rats from the experimental conditions had developed stomach lesions. In a report by Keith Redenborough, former employee of Monsanto, the stomach lesions were incidental in nature and were not a result of eating the Flavor Saver tomatoes. However, Dr. Fred Hines, staff pathologist at the Department of Health and Human Services, had some criticisms for the study.
Critics of genetically modified products, GMs, saw pictures like the one of this distended lab rat and cried, "I knew it." The jury is still out on the methodology of the tests it was subjected to. One skeptic questioned why, if the results are like this on the test animals, aren't people in some countries where they've been eating the suspect stuff for many years not dropping like flies? One of the findings' co-authors is president of the Committee of Independent Research and Information on Genetic Engineering, CRIGEN, in France. Its mandate is to act in the interests of ordinary people, companies, unions, the scientific community, labelling bodies, and economic study. In his explanations to the media, he said that regulation tests lasting for only 3 months are ineffective in discovering the health impact of GMs over a life cycle. The rat's lifespan is 2 years, and that's how long his tests went on. Corinne Lepage is one of the heads at CRIGEN, was once an environment minister in the French government, and is now a member of the European Parliament. She's not surprised. She said, "We've spoken plainly and bluntly about this, and I hope things are going to change. I've called it to the attention of the ministers of the 27 EU member states and the European Commissioner responsible for health policy, John Daly, to ask that all GMs consumed in Europe be subject to studies lasting for 2 years." The anti-GM movement has long sought to involve more players in seeking scientific answers. As decisions on authorizing biotechnology got to be a matter of pass the buck in Europe, they increasingly defaulted to the European Commission. In 2010, it ruled to allow GM production and imports, but left the choices up to individual countries. Now 10 countries in the world account for 98% of all land surface on which GMs are grown. Not total land under cultivation, but it does account for 160 million hectares. The US and Brazil are the most enthusiastic. In Europe, 8 of the 27 EU members grow GMs, Spain and Portugal with the lion's share, 90%, but others also grow Mon 810 maize and the Amflora potato. A moratorium is already in force in France and Italy, and varyingly in others, notably Austria. A key researcher in the latest GM bombshell, Gilles-Éric Seralini, said he looked forward to debating fairly with peers who are real scientists and not lobbyists.
And now to a call from Dr. Fred Hines.
The disparity in the reported findings of gastric erosions in the studies has not been adequately addressed or explained by the sponsor or the laboratory. Also, the criteria for qualifying a lesion as incidental or rare were not provided in the sponsor's report. Therefore, the studies cannot determine if the Flavor Saver tomatoes are safe for commercial use.
Dr. James Mariansky, the chairman of the FDA Task Group on Food Biotechnology, made some recommendations for the treatment of GMOs.
Our task group reviewed types of new varieties of food from plants, animals, and microorganisms, safety issues and concerns, and regulatory options. We proposed several regulatory approaches, including applying the Food Additives Amendment to new GMO foods so they would undergo extensive safety testing before becoming available to the public.
This was proposed in 1991. Today, GMOs and their alien genes are not considered food additives and therefore are barely regulated.
You're with the Agriculture Committee. Would you be in favor of labeling non-genetically modified foods compared to genetically modified foods? There's been a big debate going on. Monsanto has been a big lobbyist in Capitol Hill to restrict the labeling of genetically modified foods. Are you in favor of giving the people a choice to wonder what is GMO and what's non-GMO?
Well, a lot of times and I'm a farmer myself, and they use those products, and I think they are perfectly safe. And there's obviously some environmental groups that use scare tactics about that, and numerous others. So, but I say let the market. If folks want to see that and they want to pay a lot more for organic, I mean, they will have that identified. And but most of what we use has been genetically enhanced at various times. I mean, the ability of folks in particularly environmentalist movement to misuse and mislead folks. I'll give you a perfect example of that is this issue of lean, finely textured beef. And you might have heard about that. Folks, we because of misinformation coming out of one television outlet, I think it was CBS News, ran 30 consecutive stories that was full of bad science, misinformation. In my district, they eliminated 250 jobs and said, go home. And they shut down a plant. There were 4 plants around the country. I'll tell you today, lean, finely textured beef was the safest beef you could buy in the entire country because of the innovative process by which they killed E. coli. But don't let science get in the facts, folks in Washington and many of these movements. And so everything needs to be fact-based, but let consumers have those particular choices.
This concludes the Treadstone International Special on genetically modified organisms. We hope that you can use the knowledge we have presented to you tonight to make better decisions in the future. After all, you are your choices. Thank you for watching, and good night. No animals were modified in the production of this video.